Right, welcome to another podcast episode of Fringe Frequencies. I'm not going to do the strange voice this time. I don't have a deep enough voice. So, been a good week? Yeah, busy?
Yeah, it's been a good week.
Yeah,
It's been a while since we've been able to sit down and actually talk, so I'm excited.
It's been a couple of weeks of just mentalness over this holiday periods.
Man, you forgot to do that. This is Jason, and I would say I'm Cody.
Oh, did I?
Fringe Frequencies, No, it's all right. No, I like it. I like running with the amateurish
You like amateur Amateurville?
It's good.
This is Cody, and this is Jason, and this is Fringe Frequencies.
It is.
No, seriously, I am Jason. This is Cody. We have not been here for a couple of weeks. Holiday periods, just family stuff happening. We will try to keep it up for our millions of fans out there.
Yep.
And let those dollars roll in with, YouTube and they're all the shorts. So it's awesome. So tonight's topic, it's going to be a bit loose, and not loose on facts, but just loose. We may just dart in and out. We're no Michael Heisers or ancient scholars ourselves. We're pretty well amateurs, but I think we can still do our part in highlighting some aspects within wider stories. In this case here, we're going to be talking about the biblical Hebrew account of creation, the flood, and our existence, and particularly the biblical Hebrew account of our existence and how it started, and compared to Sumerian culture, Enki, Anunnaki, those kinds of beginnings that some people may be familiar with. So we're going to be a bit loose with it. There's just too much content to get through in an hour and a half, 2 hours, so we'll do our best. We're really just glossing the surface and just showing how between the various accounts of creation and also flood stories that are out there, the biblical one's not the only one, not by any means. And that doesn't mean that the other stories are untrue. They're all part of the same beginning, but they're coming from different perspectives and often different narratives. And tonight's discussion will be showing how the biblical narrative around the creation account and the flood is unique.
Yeah.
That's really what this is about. It's unique. It's and even the God of the Bible that we believe in is unique amongst all the gods. So it's getting there. So to start this off, really we will start in Genesis, I guess. We could start the other way around with the Sumerian accounts. Would you like to give some beginning on that, or would you like me to start that?
Oh no, look, it's definitely. We try to jump into the subject straight away, but I think it's also important to point out it is very unique. The Bible. I find that there's no other text that claims to be historically accurate and an actual historical event that isn't also mythological. So as we'll find in the Sumerian recordings that we have, just like in sort of Indian recordings, just like in ancient Chinese recordings, a lot of this is mythological, whereas the biblical account, the literature is historical. So for example, you might hear a lot about, I'll use the sort of I'm pretty sure it's the Greek pantheon is Zeus and Hercules, yeah. So when you think about Zeus and Hades and Poseidon, when they record events relating to those deities, that they're recording them in a mythological literature. So they're not talking about specific places like Mount Olympus isn't a physical place that you can look to and say, okay, this is where this happened. Yes, you can say that.
It could be. I mean, that could be a reference to Hermon.
Well, absolutely.
Yeah.
Could be a
Mount
reference, but there's an obvious implication that it is mythological writing. Whereas when you look at the ancient Hebrew writings, they're not trying to be mythological in any way. They're trying to be specific. This person, Noah, his sons, his wives, or his sons' wives and his wife, and it's very clear that there's a unique almost allegation or implication that this is historical.
And there are genealogies.
Absolutely. It's clearly historical writing. So I think that's something unique that people don't think about too much, because I hear a lot of people say, oh, well, everyone's got a flood story, a global flood or a local flood story. It's like, well, a lot of these are quite mythological. And yes, we are looking into the idea that they have a root in truth.
But why do you think that is? I mean, do you think that is because oral history passed down. I mean, obviously they're coming from an original, you could say
Source,
well-intentioned source. So I by no means look at all these ancient stories and think that people were deliberately trying to mislead at least everyday people that were just like us. They're well-intentioned. They're passing down oral history, oral stories, and over time, they either get lost, like a lot of the accounts as we're going to talk about just briefly tonight, like Sumerian accounts of creation and floods. The whole tracks are missing.
Yes.
The whole tracks are missing. They're gone, cuneiform. So do you think that's what it is? It's just a case of oral history getting passed down. Bits and pieces are missing. It becomes so loose that we have, like, did you do classics at school? Classics?
Nah, not antiquity.
Yeah,
no,
we did classics in the stories. Gilgamesh, we did all those kind of classical stories. And they're very, they have a narrative, but they're more or less just, they appear as kind of just, stories of tragedy and love and war, but they're not
allegorized.
They're not very deep.
Well, I think when it comes to,
At least they don't appear to be. Yeah.
well, when it comes to like modern schooling and public schooling, at least in Australia, it's certainly not front and center. And certainly, like when you're studying, I think we had, I can't remember what they called cultural studies. Like, this is how fried I am. Like, I completely do not remember what the class was. It was some kind of history class, I believe. And the only thing we touched on that could be related to a biblical narrative was the dream time with the Aborigines.
Dream time stories.
Yeah. And the reason I say that's related to a biblical narrative is because there are actually some interesting parallels between the idea of the dream time and the rainbow serpent, and with the Garden of Eden and the serpent of the garden. So that's as close as we got. We never talked about the global flood. We never talked about giants. We never talked about long-lived humans. We never talked about anything like that. Dinosaurs we talked about,
Did you grow up? I mean, you didn't grow up in New Zealand like I did, but
No, I was born and raised here, bro.
Yeah, I know. But I mean, the stories, like when I was 6 years old, I remember the mythological Māori stories about Maui and basically the North and the South Island. Did you ever grow up with some of those?
Not really. It was more.
I forget some of the names now, but
it was more like to Tanakh and Hinemore. The love story. It was more like who's that other guy? Oh, I can't remember his name. He came in on our Waka. I think it was Waikato, the Waikato guy. He slept with the other guy's wife, and then he came and killed him. He was a really famous warrior. If Wade was here, he'd say it straight away.
Oh, he'd be a no straight away. Yeah, I mean, you're talking like, I don't know, 30, 35 years ago now, and I just bring it back. It was there's interesting mythological stories.
Well,
but, yeah.
When it comes to the idea of this recurring story, or even recurring stories of biblical things, the common argument that I get is, well, the Bible copied them. It's like, well, how do you know that the Bible came first? And the sort of, again, we're not historians, but a logical response I often give people is the idea that, well, these accounts are mythological, whereas this account is very firmly planted in a historical narrative, So if I was to say something like, well, here we have a story of a guy named Hercules, a demigod who goes around with the strength of 100 men or whatever, and there's no clear logical reason why he has these powers, and it's more about like, well, this is clearly based on some kind of secondhand knowledge. This is clearly based on someone who just like with the story of Atlantis, doesn't have all the information, and that's probably not the best example because Hercules is a very well-known figure. But when someone talks about this idea of, these giants of the Bible, these Nephilim, these stories that we have of these, I think they were the Amalekites. I can't remember who they were, but Goliath was one of them. Gog was one of them. These stories of these giants. It's not only is it grounded in a historical narrative, but it also gives the reason why they were like that. And the term demigod isn't too far from the mark, because the angels were called, I believe they were referred to as Elohim, and they,
well, spirits are Elohim, but that's another discussion for another day.
Well, the idea is that we have an understanding that they were not natural, and it fits in with this historical narrative that these supernatural beings were there. They were the offspring of supernatural beings, you know. So where I see, you know, Hercules being this story of I think it was Zeus was his father and Hera was his mother. I can't remember. I look, okay, well, what do I know about Zeus? What do I know about Hera? And you see these very wild, fantastical stories about them. How, you know,
they don't seem to be centered on any kind of, which is strange for if you think about it, which is really strange for Greece. But I mean, this predates Greece. I mean, this has nothing to do with Greece. Yeah. This is way before it. But it's strange for, let's say, the modern Greek culture of the time. Let's say around Alexander the Great, when they were very, very, you know, specific and accurate about things, and yet a lot of their mythological stories are not accurate, or not accurate, but they're not trying to be precise. They're very loose stories. Based on oral history. I'm just going to read this beginning of this.
Yeah. Reel it back in. Yeah.
Reel it back in. Yeah. Just going to start with the Sumerian account of creation. So I was going to read this out because it's not stuck in my head. So the Sumerian account of creation and the flood is found in the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest recorded stories in human history. So a couple of the key points. Creation is a result of a battle between gods. And the Sumerian, that's key, is a result of a battle between gods, plural. In the Sumerian account, creation is not the result of a single deity's action, but rather a violent struggle between gods. The chief god, Marduk, defeats the goddess Tiamat and creates the world from her body. Humans were created to serve the gods and work for them. According to the Sumerian account, humans are created by the gods to serve and worship them. Humans were seen as inferior to the gods and were created to do their bidding. So the flood was a punishment from the gods for the noise created by humans, and only Utnapishtim and his family survived. In the Sumerian account, the gods decide to send a flood to destroy humanity because they are noisy. The god Ea warns Utnapishtim, a pious man, to build a boat, and here comes the parallel with Noah, and take his family and animals with him to survive the flood. Utnapishtim offers a sacrifice to the gods and is granted immortality. So we're going to just pause there because the rest of it is there. So this is... There are gaps in the Sumerian cuneiform, so we don't have exactly all of the account. It's very loose. However, you straight away see from what I was just reading just earlier, creation is a result of a battle between the gods. It's like an offspring of war, so to speak. It's not a offspring of love. It's not an offspring of not even devotion. I mean, God made, and you'll see this in our accounts. God made us to worship Him. It's the other way around. We're not objects of worship, but we are objects to worship God. So, and in this account here, the humans were created by the gods to serve and worship them. The worship part is very similar, but to serve, I mean, God didn't create us to serve Him, to worship Him. What was one of the first things He said to Adam when He gave him the earth? What did He say?
Well, replenish the earth.
Well,
to have dominion over it.
To have dominion and enjoy it.
Yeah.
And enjoy it. That doesn't sound like the need to serve God. God doesn't need us to serve Him.
No, I think when it comes to the biblical account, we have not only the best description of the state of man, but the best description of the purpose of man. You know, so we're taking in not just Old Testament but New Testament as well in that statement. You know, but when I look at something like the Epic of Gilgamesh or the Bhagavad Gita, or even when I'm looking at the Quran, you know, that not only does it have not a good example of what the state of man is, what the issue with man is, and what the heart of man is, it also has a big problem with what the purpose of man is. You know, so just from a simple perspective of, we lost that camera. Just from the simple perspective of a logical attempt to explain the state of man and the purpose of man, I believe the Bible is superior.
So so with regards to the purpose, God's purpose, not so much God's purpose, the purpose that you see in the narrative is the narrative of the biblical Hebrew narrative is quite contrasting with this.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I mean, just look at the language or the account as to the purpose of mankind in the Epic of Gilgamesh. It's petty. It's very petty. You know, the gods come across as very petty beings. You know, so not only are we dealing with a polytheistic worldview, which is basically dead now. There are no real, like, you can look at the Hinduism as a living polytheistic religion, but it's very difficult to actually nail down someone who believes in the millions of gods that they have. You know, and it's almost, I don't know how you can reconcile. Like that makes sense if we're just talking about angelic, non-perfect beings, right? That makes sense. But it doesn't make sense if we're talking about the creator of the universe. You know, I know that a lot of polytheistic, like even in Sumer, I believe they had a one god above all gods. You know, I know it wasn't Tiamat, but Marduk, I think, was still this god with somewhat equals. You know, and you see that with Zeus as well. You see it with Zeus. You see it with Jupiter. You see it with Apollo. You know. So for me, when you're talking about specifically the account that humans were created as almost an afterthought, you know, it doesn't mesh well with what I seem to see with the complete story of the Hebrew Bible. Because, you know, obviously we believe that the Hebrew Bible is complete in the New Testament, right? And that gives us, you know, Chuck Missler used to say it all the time, you know, the New Testament is the Old Testament revealed, and the Old Testament is the New Testament concealed, right? So the idea that the Old Testament is just a better, complete, more logical story of creation, I draw it from the idea of that it just has a more well-rounded purpose to the creation of humans, and a non-petty example from a monotheistic God, you know.
And one of the contrasting themes, and you know, I'll read a little bit more of this in a second, but the contrasting themes of the polytheistic nature of their culture, the morality, I think that's if there's one thing this evening that we'll get out of this conversation that I want to reveal to listeners is, I don't need to, and neither does the listener, need to know everything about ancient culture to understand the different narrative. And it comes down to morality. It comes down to what is morally right and what is morally wrong. Who decides that? Is it subjective or is it objective? Well, if it is subjective, then there is absolutely nothing wrong with ancient cultures and their ritual sacrifice of children, their ritualistic orgies, and performances and worship of Ishtar and ancient goddesses. Absolutely nothing wrong with it, if morality is subjective. And the biblical account, and this is what it comes down to, is when we read all the different stories, that is the difference in the narrative, is that the biblical Hebrew account, and obviously starting with the Noah, you could start at the beginning with Adam and Eve. You could go to the Noahide laws a little bit later on. Then you could go to obviously Exodus 20, Deuteronomy 5. Is that there is objective law? I mean, the law was given because of transgressions.
Yeah, well, if I can interject,
yeah, sure.
You know, it's definitely more. I mean, when you read the Epic of Gilgamesh, there's not a clear implication of what's right and wrong.
No, there's not.
So even within the narrative that they're trying to tell, it doesn't give us a clear example of what this God actually wants. Well, worship, okay, he wants worship. He wants humanity to glorify him. Well, okay, well, you know, it doesn't seem that there's clear instructions as to how to do that and how not to do that. It's similar with Allah. It's similar with Islam. You know, a lot of and without getting too far away from the ancient Sumerian texts, you know. Then we have to contrast it with what we have in the Bible. And you mentioned the Abrahamic sort of period, the Adam and Eve period, the Adamic period, and this period where we obviously had a law, right? So, you know, it seems to me that the creator of obviously we're Christians. Obviously we believe that the Lord our God is, you know, but but even from not an atheistic, even from an agnostic standpoint, it's like, okay, well, if there's a God and a creator and he's created humanity, he's obviously given us a conscience. He's obviously given us a sense of right and wrong. So obviously right and wrong is important, It's kind of like saying, obviously...
But what right and wrong is important.
Exactly. So here we have an implication that, okay, well, if he's given us a sense of right and wrong, why would he not then tell us what right and wrong is clearly? Why wouldn't he clearly present it to us?
And that would be exemplified. That would be manifest in the narrative. It would be manifest in the story.
Exactly.
And it would be orderly.
Well, this is the thing,
because the world is order. You can see it all around
you. Well, absolutely, and you can see the effect of disorder. You can see the effect of chaos and of anarchy. I know. I mean, I was an anarchist.
Anarchy or anarchy?
You can see the effect of anarchy. but
Enki.
But in all seriousness, who's L?
L.
Hell.
L. E-L.
E-L.
The ancient Israelites referred to God as L.
Yeah, I know that.
Yeah.
Kal-El. Look,
would you like some kryptonite?
the idea that our God was a God who had an argument with his wife and then I don't know, created humanity from
I wonder
her
what
body.
they were talking about. Was she nagging him?
Well, it's kind of like, well, look, I could piece this together. And I know that sounds dismissive of these Sumerian texts. I know that sounds condescending, but I mean, when we're talking about the wholeness, the unity of the Hebrew scriptures and how it describes God's character, his nature, his intentions, his actions, like how it describes it, and that is to say how he describes himself through his own word.
Attributes.
Well, it's in my opinion, very complete. It gives us a complete understanding of who God is and what he wants.
God makes the claim that he's the Lord of Lords and King of Kings. He makes the claim that he is the ancient prime mover.
Yeah.
He has no beginning, he has no end, and that there is no one beside him.
Well, this is where we can draw morality. So we can't, like, in my opinion, if I'm talking about a moral being, right, Marduk is not a moral being. It seems, and how am I defining morality? Well, I'm defining morality by God, by the God of the Hebrew scriptures, right? If I'm defining morality based on Marduk, he's no better than me. Like he's just as imperfect as I am. So who is he to judge me?
Mind you, I just made the comment that he's vindictive. It's, some people could say, well, God is also vindictive.
He is.
I don't know. Yeah, well,
he's the great vindictive. On the day of judgment, there'll be vindication.
Well, that's right. It's the question is, it's what do we when we talk about vindication or being vindictive, from what position? It's like, well, from the position of supreme authority and morality, which Marduk clearly didn't hold.
Well, the scriptures say that
that little child. Did you ever see Exodus? Do you remember Christian? It was Christian Bale.
Oh,
that movie was terrible, and God was
Exodus,
like a little
gods and kings.
God was a little baby at the end, a little vindictive baby.
Well, they got two cis white males to play two Egyptians.
Hey man, there's a big furor about Cleopatra. She was Hellenistic and she was white. And they've put not that I care, but they put an African American lady in.
That was something I remember because Hollywood has a history of whitewashing, but they didn't so even the Ten Commandments.
Now they're woke washing.
Yeah, well, now it's going the other way, but not that matters.
I don't really care who's in it. Who cares?
What's interesting is that even now, even in our modern time, we want to mythologicalize these stories even now. So what I would say in a very reductive way, the Epic of Gilgamesh is just a watered down version of what actually happened, and a very humanized version. So you look at something like Exodus, Gods and Kings with Christian Bale and Joel Edgerton. I think it's Joel.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. The Epic of Gilgamesh is what happens today. We receive the truth, we receive something that's true, and we modify it or we change it and we humanize it. This is in Romans, bro. Romans chapter 1 talks about this. They turned God, the incorruptible creator, into something like into corruptible man, and unto beasts and unto creeping things. The same thing happened. Pardon me. The same thing happens here with Marduk and Tiamat. They're turning God into this human-like thing. And
we have to have some. It's what the Israelites really struggled with. They needed and they wanted to have this either human representation or some earthly representation of what God was, which is why he didn't want to give them a king. He didn't want to give him a king. He's like, finally, here you go. Here's your king. Here's Saul. Here's King Saul. Now you're going to get what you want. And
Saul.
Yeah, Saul. Yeah.
Saul.
King Saul.
Yeah. Yeah. So when because he was their king. He said, I'm your king, and even Samuel said that to them. Yep. Samuel said, we have a king, but the desire of man's heart was to be like, at that time, or at least the Israelites, was to be like everyone else. Everyone else has a king. Why don't we have a king?
They want to have someone earthly to venerate.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Saul did a really poor job.
Well, and God said that was going to happen. God said that was coming. But more than that, we want our own stories. We want our own narratives.
Our own earthly identity.
Yeah.
We crave this earthly identity.
Well, I see that. So when I was diving into this stuff, so, we can touch on Enki and the Anunnaki and stuff like that. It really, as you know, it deserves its own thing, because these are such deep topics.
Oh, there's so many different topics within topics. Yeah.
And it comes to this simple fact, right? Humanity seems to want to rewrite history the way they want to. And it's always been that way, But the further back into history we go, I believe, and this might be a very, I don't know, haughty statement, the less they had to work with, There was more, there was more, in my opinion, superstition. People had a lot more spiritually led lives. I think God was far more important. The spiritual realm was far more important to people, and not because they didn't have anything to do and because they were, stupid.
That's modern secularism. We were talking about you were out of the room before, and I know this is actually not a rabbit trail. We were talking about it with one of our guests who's behind the cameras at the moment. That secularism, humanism, and atheism. It's effectively done is it's stripped the world of Christianity. I'll go back a little bit further. So when Christianity came on the scene, we don't have to talk about the Roman Catholic Church and all the bad things they did and conquest and rape and pillaging. Most of us who are Christians realize that happened, and God has a strange purpose behind that of allowing the Roman Catholic Church to come in during the Dark Ages, and then obviously with church history, and to have all their conquests around the world. But that's how. If that didn't happen, Christianity wouldn't have got spread. But that's a discussion for another day. But when you had Christianity came in, you actually had a lot of these old belief systems. A lot of which were based on ancient pagan practices of sacrifice. A lot of them ceased. And people were venerating the God, not just the God of the Hebrews, but our God, the God of the universe. And now, with the rise, you could say in the late 1800s and 1900s, the rise of secularism, it stripped meaning, it stripped back meaning for humans in a general sense, the sense of hopelessness, especially in the West, the sense of hopelessness, no purpose. What are we here for? And so I think secularism's purpose and humanism's purpose was to strip the purpose that God had started to bring back in. And it stripped that purpose out. And now it's being filled by the old ways. Again, I see it all the time. Not just satanic practices. Most of the Satanism that I see in the world today it's they'll say, it's not real Satanism, but man, spells, rituals, people getting back into their Viking roots. You could go into Hinduism, people leaving Christianity for Hinduism, and I don't mean surface Hinduism.
Just idolatry. They're falling back into idolatry.
But they're falling back into the old ways.
Yeah,
but they're actually falling back into the old ways. Because these things existed, these things were real, these entities, these figures were real. So tonight we're not saying that these, alternative or different perspective Mesopotamian stories didn't happen. I'm not saying they didn't happen, right? That's not what I'm claiming. What I'm saying is that the biblical account serves to show the God's purpose, who He is, in stark contrast to who these other entities were, which is, I've got the book of Enoch here tonight, which is, I might just reference Genesis 6 in that, because that sort of ties into what I'm just saying now with regards to, where a lot of these, you could say, gods and godlike figures have come from, and the Genesis 6 account and Enoch answered that perfectly, and they do it chronologically, and they also do it very systematically, and it's not loose.
Yeah.
But yeah. So I was just saying, you know, I see people going back to this stuff.
Well, you mentioned something that's very interesting. You know, secular humanism is drawing us away from God, but then it's going to be filled with something else, right?
Correct.
And this is how secular humanism has been used. You know, when you look at whether you're looking at Mao, whether you're looking at Stalin, whether you're looking at Hitler, whether you're looking at even, and they're the only three I can bring to mind. I know there's more. They took away God. They took away specifically,
Stalin.
Specifically Christian God. You know, the monotheistic God, and I would say, of course, other gods. I'm not saying it was just for Christians, but yeah, they were heavily persecuted, ripped away. Even I think even now in China, they really don't like God there, you know. But that said, they took it away for what purpose?
There's a lot of Christians there.
Well, this is the thing, you know.
It's got the largest Christian population in the world.
Yeah, it's got a pretty big Islamic population too, I believe.
North.
Yeah.
Xinjiang.
Yeah. What was the purpose of taking away that? It was to take away purpose, to take away hope, to take away an idea of morality. You know, so when I look at why secular humanism was employed in the past, it was a form of control to get people ready for what, whether it be communism, whether it be dictatorships. You know, so. It's always bizarre to me a bit that people say, well, that's what religion was for. Religion was to control the people. God was used to control the people. And you mentioned the Catholic Church, bro. You just read the New Testament, and you'll see that the Catholic Church is not a representation of what God intended.
And just on that topic, just so we're there, so the listeners and viewers, we don't hate Roman Catholics, people. We don't hate, full stop. But the institution itself, it is one of the single most powerful, if not the most. The Vatican is the most powerful organization on earth. Yeah, it's secretive. I think that's the most obvious thing about it. So when we talk about Christianity as a whole, we really have to make it clear. Sure, there would have been some Protestant sectors, I'm sure, that engaged in practices that we would abhor today. But the message of the gospel and
persecuting the Catholic Church.
No, engaging, even some engaging in the slave trade.
Oh yeah, look, yeah. So we don't hate Muslims. We don't hate Jehovah's Witnesses. We don't hate them. You know, it's the idea that we hate deception. You know, we hate deception. We hate glory that's taken from God. You know, and so when I look at someone in the Catholic Church, my reaction to them isn't disgust. It's oftentimes, and it's sad to say, pity. You know, and I know that sounds really condescending, but it's like and I'm painting this picture as someone who's truly struggling and is trapped in this system. You know, we have people at our church who are in that situation and couldn't escape. You know, they just couldn't escape this religiosity that they were stuck in, and they're the people who we love and hope that they get the truth. And pardon me. When it comes to something like this, you know, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, perhaps now it's easy to look at this and say, you know, not how silly this is, but to really criticize it, to break it down and to try and justify it. But there was perhaps a time in Sumerian culture where if you questioned this, you were killed. You know, perhaps I haven't studied Sumer's history. I haven't studied what I can imagine.
If you were an Israelite and you started to worship other gods, especially during Moses' time, see you later.
We'll look at I don't know who it was. The guys who were really into child sacrifice. It really killed them. Not the Molech guys, not them. The guys in South America.
Mine's Aztecs.
Was it Aztecs? Were the Aztecs the ones that loved?
The older ones are the Olmecs.
Yeah. Well, you look at them. It's like, you know, I wouldn't be caught dead criticizing their god and perhaps their written histories. I'm sure most of it was oral, but I'm sure they had a written language. So here we have this example of you know, I would say the most libertarian, the most tolerant religion is Christianity. It's the most tolerant religion, you know. Like when you think about, you know, when I think about pastors, and I know a few pastors, when I think about them standing at their pulpit teaching death to the infidels and killing people and all that kind of stuff, it doesn't mesh because it's not a teaching of Christianity.
No, it's not. You should not murder.
Well, this is the thing. There are religions where that is openly taught, where there's openly taught to harm people and to hurt them, and I think those types of religions should have the type of scrutiny that Christianity has. Biblical Christianity is gives rise to a world in which people can share ideas and not feel like they're going to be murdered or persecuted for them. We may disagree, and look, I would specify Christianity definitely. There were definite, rules about killing people in the Hebrew scriptures who were blasphemers and who were, just straight up idolaters. So I'm not saying that doesn't exist in pre-Christian beliefs from the traditional Old Testament standpoints.
No, because it does.
But it does. But we're talking about Christianity. We're talking about the arrival of the Savior,
and that's a subject on some people will pinpoint to that and go, aha. But what about that? It's like, okay, well, just to crack that open for a second, so we don't miss the idea. God's vindictive because he flooded the world. Well, it's like if you understood what the world was like, then you would want to destroy it as well. And on this topic of God wanting to set apart his people, the Israelites or the Hebrews, even before when they were in Egypt for 400 years, they were worshipping all kinds of things, all kinds of crazy stuff. And God's bringing them together, and he's saying, no. I'm setting you apart. You're my people. This is who I am. I am the one who runs this world. You guys have gone off and done all this other stuff. I'm going to set you apart so the nations can eventually come back to me, but you have to do this. And if you don't, this plan is not going to work. It's going to fall apart because there is a level of freedom, it gives.
Yeah, and so one of the things I would say is that you can't come to and again, I haven't read the full Epic of Gilgamesh, but you can't come to a true understanding of morality, right and wrong, if it's okay to do this, if it's okay to do that, from this type of narrative, from this type of text. And I look at the Hebrew Bible and, of course, the New Testament, but more specifically the Hebrew Bible, and I say, okay, I can come to an understanding of right and wrong. I can justify it. I can come from this position of, okay, I now have hope. I now have peace. I now have an understanding of truth, these stories, and this isn't the only one. The Epic of Gilgamesh is what we're sort of using here, but the idea that that this Marduk and this Tiamat are gods to be worshipped, it really puts a real question as to the value of mankind, the value of humanity. We had a guest on my brother and I's YouTube channel, and man, it was awesome. She shared the gospel in a way that I haven't heard it shared before, and it was wonderful.
It was last Saturday.
Yeah. So and I'm going to butcher it because she sat there for a few minutes or at least 30 seconds, just really putting it together in her mind, and it was so beautiful. I'm going to butcher it, but I'll try and give the rendition as she did. But the idea of the gospel, the idea of our God, is so beautiful because people focus on the idea that Jesus Christ came to die for the sins of mankind and stop there. They say if you believe in Christ, he will reconcile you to God and your sins will be forgiven. You'll be washed white as snow. And as long as you confess with your mouth and believe in your heart that Jesus is Lord, you will be saved. You will go to heaven. Most people stop there. But she said it's such a shame because it takes the glory from God, because what was God's intention with the gospel? To reconcile you to him so that you have that relationship that he wanted in the start. Did he need the relationship? No. But he desired to be in fellowship with man so that there could be a mutual enjoyment of each other.
Fellowship and relationship.
This is the thing, God is so loving and wonderful that he paid that price for what? So that we could walk with God again.
What does it go? So around the time that obviously, God and Moses were hanging out with the Israelites, God always talks about circumcision of the heart. You had this physical circumcision of the Israelites, so they had this, ethnic, outward ethnic example of who they were. But he always talks about this relationship and the circumcision of a heart, how, your heart's being stony cold. And so you see that around the same time that there were like laws on blasphemy and adultery and on murder, etc., 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 which is vastly different from the nations around them. So God has molded, God has, brought the Hebrews to a place of understanding who the sole creator of this universe is. And then we cast our eyes back, hundreds and hundreds of years prior. And it couldn't be so much different with regards to purpose, again, morality, the direction where we're supposed to be going, and even being philosophical about it as well. There has to be one supreme being. Yeah. We look at the model of the world that we live in, the nature of one, the nature of number one, numero uno, the nature of someone being the best. It's literally in everything we do. In everything. Yeah. It's almost baked into the fabric of creation, baked into the fabric of how we run competitions, how we run organizations and business and everything else. It's baked in there. Number one. There is number one at the top. There is nobody else. And weird, isn't it?
Well, I'll take that even further. Look at all of our literature. Look at all of our art. It all derives to, the modern way of explaining it now would be a superhero. We're always looking to a savior. We're always looking to someone who will perform better than others.
Why not 5 saviors?
Well, this is the problem, right? This is the problem that we have. We simply don't think that way.
We don't.
Yes, you can be like, oh yeah, what about the Justice League, or what about what about I don't know, the Super Friends or whatever.
Man, that's why I like Batman.
And or the Avengers.
Yeah.
It's like that. But then you look at those stories and what happens. There's always a focal character. There's always a tipping point from one person. There always seems to be this unified point of being saved, or the hero saving, or something like that. And I'm not saying that
but those Marvel characters in all those movies, they are literally parallels to the gods.
Oh, look, we can get into this, man. They're our modern pantheon, really. But when it comes down to it, I'm not trying to use the DC universe or the Marvel universe as the perfect explanations. I'm just trying to say, look at what we're drawn to. This is what we're drawn to create.
DC's better.
Well, look, whether it's DC, whether it's Marvel, I don't really know of any other comic book universes, because I was never really big into comic books. But I'll say this: we're all looking for a hero, and that's what the human race seems to have done. And why? Because we all know there's a hero. We all know there's one hero above all.
Intrinsically.
One of my favorite drawings. It was awesome. It had the DC Marvel universe, and they were all sitting around Jesus, right? And Jesus is leaning over to Tony Stark or Superman, and he goes, "Let me tell you how I saved the entire universe." And it was like, it was a really, it was a very Christian thing, But I thought to myself, the greatest savior is sitting there, like, fair enough. Our vain imaginings of Iron Man and of Spider-Man, beating Thanos at the click, it pales in comparison to the reality of the situation, that we were the bad ones, we were the evil, and God dispelled the evil and was able to to reconcile us to him. There's nothing quite like the Bible. And the other thing as well, man, the Bible's the greatest epic there ever was. You call it the Epic of Gilgamesh, mate. Have you read Genesis? The Epic of Gilgamesh is like a synopsis, compared to this epic.
Just some of the crazy stories in there. One of the stories that I just in the tip of my tongue is the tribe of Benjamin. You already had Sodom and Gomorrah, and God had come along and completely destroyed it. And then you fast forward, and here are the Benjamites turning into Sodom and Gomorrites again, and they I forget the name of the concubine, and they completely they did very much like what they were doing with Lot. Yeah. They came up to the door. I don't have a Bible here with me, but they came up to the door of one of the residents, wanting their daughters or their sons, or their visitor, and he sent out this woman, and they ravaged her and basically just destroyed her all night. Yeah. And the tribes, the other 11 tribes, she was dead. They cut her into 11 pieces and sent her out, and then they went to war with the Benjamites. Like, it's just talk about epics. Yeah. And they say, you know what? If one man of these Benjamites, that they must have been like on a scale of evil that we don't even know now, where
No.
literally people are running around raping and pillaging. Not even raping and pillaging. Their minds are so gone that they do not know the difference between wrong and right anymore. It's completely gone. Like
Well, you get indwelt. These people get indwelt, bro. You know,
yeah.
and you see this. I don't know if you ever read the. I think it was the rape of Nanking. Was it that the woman? She wrote these 3 books about. I think it was how the Japanese treated us. Like I don't know if it was the Koreans or if it was the Chinese.
Chinese and the Koreans.
Yeah. Well, either way, she ended up committing suicide after writing these 3 books, and one of them was a very important book that I think a very guarded heart, a very mature person should read, not children, definitely. But it talks about the occupation of this place called Nanking by the Japanese, and it was just weeks of raping and pillaging in the modern world, you know. And some of the stories are harrowing, and simply by being exposed, because she interviewed the women, she interviewed the survivors, and it's I can't really describe it other than saying this is what happens when the powers and principalities just overcome man. They just overcome them, and they're lost to their lusts and to their wickedness, you know. And so you know, when I think about, you know, what happened with the Benjamites there, because I mean it's a similar story. I can't remember who it was. When the guy, the prince, took the daughter and he took her by force, and then she went back to the brothers, and the brothers were like, "We're going to kill these guys," you know.
Are you talking about?
Pretty sure it was Abraham's kids. Wasn't it Abraham's kids?
No.
Isaac's kids.
I
don't know.
It's Jacob's kids.
Jacob's kids. So
Yeah.
I always mix up the patriarchs,
So Reuben,
man.
it's Reuben.
Yeah.
Reuben. Reuben's one, and actually I was. Yeah.
Well, either way, I mean,
Jacob's kids. They basically go, stuff this. We're going and we're just going to slaughter.
yeah. So I think he makes them circumcise themselves first, and then they go, because they say, yeah, you can marry our sister as long as you get circumcised, and the whole town circumcises themselves, and they go and they pillage the town. You know, the idea is, and I don't think Jacob was happy with that.
No, he wasn't.
No.
But also, but he was also terrible in the sense that he didn't honor he didn't also honor his own daughter.
Well,
you know,
when it comes to, okay, so why am I talking about this? You know, the idea that you can use the Epic of Gilgamesh or the Bhagavad Gita or the Quran or these other texts that claim to know, because I mean the Quran is pretty carbon copy when it comes to the creation story, right? The fact that you can use those to develop and create a system of righteousness and a system of holiness they're incompatible. You can't, you know.
Well, it's not so much righteousness and holiness, because I mean they can be. I mean, people can give different definitions to that. What we mean is a moral framework that is objective.
Yeah.
They so I would, in defense of the Muslim, in defense of Islam and the Muslims, they would also believe in objective truth. The same way that we would, in the sense of right.
It was
wrong.
Dinah.
Huh?
Yeah, it was Dinah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
In defense of Muslims, they would also in Judaism, it would be objective truth.
Yeah, and the claim of objective truth isn't an issue that I have. It's the foundation to support it, you know, and the Quran is very fragmented. You know, it's very difficult. I mean, you have to turn to.
Have you read the Quran? Have you tried to?
Look, I have read it, but it was more of a novelty to read it.
It's quite
very
hard,
easy.
Well, I actually found it's not.
No, I mean it's small. It's short.
It's short. Yeah, it doesn't come off the tongue very easy at all.
No, and that's why you have to go to the commentaries. I can't remember what they call them. You know, like the Sunni have a different guy that they turn to who interprets the Quran. Than say the other sects of Islam, and I don't know much about it, but I do know that the parts of
call it the Sunnas.
Yeah, well, this is the thing. There's people would say that about Christianity. They'd say, "Oh, well, look, you've got the Catholic Church. Oh, look, you've got the Jehovah's Witnesses. You've got these people. You know, the Mormons. You know, but they're so easy to interpret why they have gone that way. I mean." Joseph Smith. You only have to talk about Joseph Smith for a few minutes.
Tablets?
Yeah, before the undergarments, the special glasses. You know, like it takes only a few. Oh, it was written by a science fiction writer.
Joseph Smith, wasn't he a? He was a. a Freemason?
I don't know, but what I'm
Yeah.
trying to critique is this idea that, just like with the different sects of Islam, there's different sects of Christianity. No, this is, you can read the Quran and understand why there's different sects completely, but if you read the scriptures, if you read the Bible, then it would make very little sense as to why there is such a division in the church. It makes very little sense unless there is someone actively trying to divide the church. And I mean, you only have to look at Joseph Smith. You only have to look at the way the papacy came about, the way they've worked. You only have to look at these things for like a few days, and then it'll be clear. Okay, that's clear. Whereas when I try to justify to people, okay, the Islamic sects, it makes sense. The Hindu sects make sense. They're following different gods, they're following different beliefs and different systems that are supported by their foundational texts. Well, there's no foundational texts that support Catholicism. There's none. I mean, if you bring in the Apocrypha, if you bring in, and even then, there's not much in there. Second Maccabees might help them out a little bit. Jasher helps them out a little bit. But the reality is, it doesn't give them a foundation to have what they have now. In fact, Revelation clearly shows them they shouldn't. So when it comes to arguing that, well, there's different sects of Christianity because the Bible's so hard to interpret, no, I reject that entirely. Read the Bible and you tell me if it's hard to interpret. Then read the Quran and I will agree with you. It's very hard to interpret, the Epic of Gilgamesh. How can I apply this to my life, and how can it give me purpose if it's claiming to be a historical text of the creation of mankind and an accurate rendition of the flood?
I don't think it can, and that's why I think a lot of people, they follow pagan ritualistic practices, and you could say poems, stories, just vagary ideas of a moralistic being. That I read them all the time. I've come across some interesting stuff that I've started to read, and I can see how people can find solace in that, in the absence of, let's say, in the absence of the Bible, or the absence of, I think it's just a lack of understanding of the Bible, to be fair, and it could be for various reasons, people's backgrounds, the way they've grown up. But yeah, so just going back to the biblical Hebrew account creation, sort of going back to the middle. It's so God is the sole creator of the universe, one God who created the universe and everything in it. That's Genesis 1:1-2. The idea of monotheism is central to the Jewish and Christian faiths, and you could argue, obviously, Islam
and
as well.
Islam, yeah.
And is unique compared to the polytheistic beliefs of other ancient cultures, all of them, and they develop. Other than you could argue, and they sort of develop, if you want to call them that. Not that I would say Christianity developed, although you could say the traditions developed. But it's like, what was that thing you said about the New Testament is the old that was
So the Old Testament is the New Testament concealed, and the New Testament is the Old Testament revealed.
So there is development in there, but it's things that are either hidden or revealed. It's revealed truth.
Something I'll say to wrap it up, something I'll say is that the most unique thing about Christianity is it's the only true not works-based salvation. So even in the Islamic texts, even in the Hindu texts, and even in the Buddhist texts, even Taoism, there is this idea that you can work towards God's favor. You can work towards heaven. And the truly unique thing about Christianity is that you do nothing to get to heaven other than accept God, and this to me makes the most sense, Can
you specify that for our listeners? So we're not saying that we don't aspire to do good works.
No.
And we don't say that they're not important. What we're saying is to actually get through those pearly gates is not determined by your works. Now, can you displease God? Is displeasing God quite different from whether or not you're saved or not?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So can you still grieve God now?
Yeah.
Even while saved?
Yeah. So the implication that Christianity gives is that you can't earn your way to heaven. Nothing you do will earn you heaven. God has earned us heaven for his sake and for his glory. and we have the wonderful gift of salvation. Now, if it's a gift, it means that if I've earned it, if I've done something to earn it, it's no more a gift, it's due payment. I'm owed heaven, but every other
and you
religion...
can have pride in that.
Exactly. And I can be happy about it, and I can earn
pride?
it. Well, pride was the fall, and this is what sets, in my opinion, and a lot of other theologians' opinions, this is what sets Christianity apart from every other belief system. We don't have a hope in heaven because of our own selves. We have a hope in heaven because of Christ. And that to me makes the most sense. That
or a hope in hell of getting to heaven.
Yeah.
If that works.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing, we talk to Islamic people all the time. We talk to our Islamic friends, specifically the ones that you've brought,
Saucies,
and this is the thing, that just like Christians, they come in all shapes and sizes, but and ethnic backgrounds, but you ask them, how do you get to heaven? And they'll tell you, we don't know. Allah will tell us how we get to heaven, and only He will weigh the balances and tell us if we're getting there. They actually have no hope. They actually have no hope of getting to heaven until they get there and see what Allah says. And I believe I don't believe that an all-loving God would do that. There are things that people would criticize about the Christian God, and they'd say, how can an all-loving God do this? How can He do that? And all of those things, they're very easy discussions to have when you put them up against Tiamat, when you put them up against Zeus, when you put them up against Allah, when you put them up against Joseph Smith. These things are easy conversations to have compared to talking about how Apollo is going to save everyone. Aristotle had a big problem. He said, how can an all-knowing, all-good God, how can he truly judge evil? Because his position was that, well, all men have done evil, so how can an all-loving, all-powerful God that judges perfectly just dismiss our judgment? And this is what the Muslims say to me. They say, well, God can do anything. Apparently their God can forgive sin when He just wants to forgive sin, and that's what He gets to do. That sounds capricious to me. That sounds like we don't really know how to please God. He's going to tell us that He forgives us anyway. Well, Aristotle didn't know about Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ came, paid the price. He paid for the sin that we can now say we're free from because of Him. But yeah, look, man, this is something that I would say I came across during the quote unquote tinfoil hat days. The Sumerians, what they believe, the Mesopotamians, what they believe, what the Greek believed, what the Romans believed, and assessing them all. And I love the Sumerian ones because we have Enki, we have the Anunnaki, we have, led me over to Nibiru, led me over to all these places, but away from the truth, and yeah, I think a lot of people stumble across this when they're on that path to truth,
Yeah, and yeah, that like you summarize that beautifully, which is pretty well that the biblical Hebrew creation accounts. We didn't really touch on the flood.
We got to do our antediluvian.
Yeah, we have to do our antediluvian, and I think the flood actually, I think that owes its own.
Yeah.
That owes its own one, but and I didn't even get to open this up, but this can actually be a part of.
Stop banging the table; it's the worst.
I'm banging the book.
That ain't the book.
It says the book, the Book of Enoch, a complete guide and reference. But look, you summed it up quite well. It's the creation account, the biblical creation, the Hebrew Tanakh creation account. It gives purpose, it gives meaning, it gives objective meaning, and it shows us that God has to be one. There has to be one. There has to be a supreme being that has made us. And I believe, just as you do, that it is the best example of where to position and direct our worship.
Yeah, amen.
And if we're after truth, and I know that a lot of people out there, that we're all, I always say, we're all in this crap sandwich, all trying to figure out truth. Right? And this is for our listeners, right?
Yeah.
We're not here to, judge you in the sense of condemning, because we understand that people are trying to find out what is truth. Where is that direction? So our objective tonight was just to really sort of guide, at least in our very amateurish way, guide people towards look at this perspective. Have a look at it if you haven't before. Put aside your preconditions. Put aside your your past or things that have put you off about the God of the Hebrews, the God of the Bible, and just maybe re-explore it in light of some of the things that we've touched on poorly, but as best we can. So yeah,
I'd definitely leave it at that, man.
Yep,
definitely. Give the Bible a chance. You've heard about it. You know it. You know the word, the Bible. You know the name Jesus Christ. Give it a chance and see what this is all about.
Yep.
Yeah.
Till next time. I do believe at some stage we will touch on Genesis 6, the flood, Enoch, all that kind of cool stuff, which I know that we're bursting at the seams to get out into. It's just good to be back after a few weeks, just to be able to talk, have a bit of a laugh, but also sort of direct ourselves and other people into what's true, and hopefully do a decent job of it. So thank you for watching Fringe Frequencies.
Fringe Frequencies.
Actually, you know what? The next podcast we have, we're going to have a really cool intro.
Yeah, I've seen it, man. I've seen it. This one will.
This one definitely will, because I've almost compiled it for our lodge. So we're going to have a really a beginning. So next time, so for our next episode, have you selected it?
Yes.
You have?
It's different from what we've done.
Okay, cool.
Everything's different from what
I'm
we've
looking
done.
forward to hearing about it, man.
Yeah,
so till next time.
Till next time. Thank you for listening.
Over and out.
Thank you.
Over and out.